the director of the Salvation Army here in Rolla. And we have a little table set up over here. I understand y'all have a food drive. We would dearly appreciate any donations that we could get monetarily or canned goods, whatever, for our pantry. Due to the seriousness of the economic situation, we are seeing far more families than we have ever seen in need. Our families come in large groups. They come in and have never been there before. And we just would appreciate any donations whatsoever. And also our kettle campaign is coming up for Christmas, and that money goes to help the Phelps County families. And we would appreciate so much if you would sign up to ring bells to help bring the hungry food for Phelps County. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the good work you do. All right, our first speaker is running for Missouri Secretary of State. He's from Willard, Missouri. He's a state rep for 139th District. His name, and give him a warm welcome here, Shane Schoeller.
Well, it is great to be with you here this afternoon. And one of the main things I've talked about during this campaign is that we need to do more to make sure we protect your vote. Would you all agree with that? It's not very strong. Would you think we need to do more to make sure we protect your vote every time you cast your ballot? Yeah. Absolutely. Do you think we're asking too much for you to show up and present a photo identification to make sure nobody steals your vote before you get to cast your ballot? Don't you think that just makes plain common sense? Yeah. I do. And yet my opponent that I'm running against, he said it's extreme and unfair. And then you have Secretary Carnahan yesterday who sent out a press release telling you that you don't need a photo identification. I don't know about you, I'm going to feel a lot better when we become a photo ID state, because that's what we need to do every day to make sure we're protecting your vote. It's also important that we do all that we can to make sure that when people register to vote, that we know they're American citizens. And here's why. In the state of Colorado in 2010, they had almost 12,000 people registered to vote that were not citizens. Out of that 12,000, almost 5,000 cast a ballot in 2010. Do you remember what happened in 2008? John McCain won the state of Missouri by less than 4,000 votes. It's time to do a better job with proof of citizenship. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah. Absolutely. And I want to make sure we'll be able to fight for you. You know, we've got counties in our state who have up to 25% more people on the voter rolls than people that live in the county. We've had organizations like Acorn who've consistently put forth fraudulent voter registration forms. And you remember what happened in the city of St. Louis in the election of 2000, don't you? Where they had the polls open past 7 o'clock. And so every voter that didn't live in the city of St. Louis was disenfranchised. And that's why I want to make sure every time you cast your ballot, I want to make sure that vote is protected. And I'm going to continue to fight for that every step of the way if I get elected your Secretary of State. And then it's also important when you get your ballots and you get those ballot initiatives you get to vote on. I don't know about you, but I am tired of having a Secretary of State for the past 8 years that has used politically charged terms time and time again in order to try to affect the outcome of the ballot measure. And for example, 2 years ago, you remember what happened in Proposition B? When she used a politically charged term, puppy mill? There's an example of where I believe we need to do more to hold every Secretary of State accountable going forward. And then just this July 3rd, the day before the 4th of July, she put out the biased ballot summary on health insurance exchange. Do you remember that? That measure we get to vote on November? Fortunately, the courts agreed with us, and they changed her ballot summary and ballot title on that one. But I think going forward, your voice needs to be front and center. And that's why I'm proposing the Fair Ballot Commission, because it is extremely important that your voice be represented. Because I think our founding fathers understood accountability matters for good government. And right now, when the Secretary of State writes a ballot title or ballot summary that's unfair, that's biased, or uses politically charged terms, the only recourse you have is to go through the courts. Well, there's two issues I have with that. First of all, it's costly because you have to hire an attorney. For example, the agriculture group spent over $150,000 2 years ago trying to fight that ballot title when it used the word puppy mill. Secondly, it's time consuming. That money and that time that you spend fighting in the courts is money and time you could have spent educating the voter on why you're for or against an issue. And that's why the Fair Ballot Commission just makes plain common sense, so that every Secretary of State understands they have accountability from the people which they represent. And that's what I want to do, your Secretary of State, is I believe in accountability, and I want to get that done for you to make sure that you can understand your ballot title and summary, and you know politics are not being played like they have for the past 8 years, because Robin Carnahan has been challenged and overturned more than any other previous Secretary of State prior to her tenure. It matters. Thank you very much. But then it matters in the area of regulation. For example, a lot of folks don't know the Division of Administrative Rulemakings within the Office of Secretary of State. So we have regulators in Jefferson City that after a law is passed by the General Assembly and signed by the governor, or a law is passed on the ballot, they literally go forth in writing the rules for those laws. Now there's a duty of the Secretary of State to make sure, first of all, the rules they write are constitutional per our Missouri Constitution. But then secondly, they also have to make sure that the rules that are written follow out the legislative intent of the legislation that was passed. And it's extremely important when you think about the economy we're in, and you think about Missourians across the state, and business owners especially, doing all they can to make sure they keep their business doors open, doing all they can to make sure they keep their employees employed, doing all they can just to try to expand their business. What they don't need is another regulator in Jefferson City who puts an unintended, unintentional regulation on their business that was never intended in the first place. And that's what we have to do to make sure we keep accountability in government, that you elect people who understand that. And it's not only laws that are passed, but it's executive orders that are written by the governor. For example, when Matt Blunt was Secretary of State, Governor Bob Holden, with the sweep of a pen, literally tried to unionize state employees across the state of Missouri. Do y'all remember that? I see some heads nodding. Well, Secretary of State Matt Blunt stood up to Governor Bob Holden and said, you don't have the authority to do that. And guess what happened? Bob Holden had to go back and rewrite the executive order because Matt Blunt refused to publish it. And that, in my opinion, is an example of where he protected Missourians, because you've all watched what's happened in Wisconsin, as they're desperately trying to get away from the stranglehold that the unions have had on them for all too long. And there's an example where Matt Blunt stood up. If he had not stood up and said no to Governor Bob Holden, we would have been 10 years down the path of what Wisconsin's trying to get away from. And that's why the Office of Secretary of State matters, because we can do more to make sure we're protecting Missourians every day, whether it's when you show up and vote, or whether it's in your daily life and the businesses and the jobs that you work in. I believe we need to do more to protect the freedom and the liberty that we have known and enjoyed and been able to grow up with. I talk about this a lot, but I'm proud to be married to my wife Minnie, and we have 3 children. Our oldest daughter Emma is 8, my next daughter Dorothy is 6, my youngest boy Johnny, he'll be 3 years old 2 days after the election. And if you're like me, I've had some sleepless nights these past 4 years. So I've looked at what's happened at the federal level, and frankly sometimes from state level with the leadership of Governor Nixon. Those people do not understand the importance of self-reliance, of liberty and freedom, and understanding the greatness and the strength of this nation comes from right here today, and the people that you represent, and the families you represent, and the values you represent. And that's the type of leadership you want to elect to your state government, in my opinion, is people that understand I am accountable to you, that you are the people that I work for. And that's what I want to do, and that's the type of government that I want to make sure we have here in the state of Missouri. But I need your help. We all need your help as we're running across this ticket. And I'm going to ask you to do some things you may have not done before. When you're in the grocery market and you see somebody you haven't seen in a while, it's time to talk about this election. It's time to maybe be a little bit more courageous than you've been before and tell them why you're voting for the people you're voting for. And when you're in church and after Sunday school or after the church service, begin to strike up a conversation maybe you've never had before with people that you know, and tell them, here's why I'm voting for these individuals, and this is why you need to vote for them. And the neighbors down your street need to hear from you. Pick up that phone and call people you've never called before, because it's going to be your energy, it's going to be your strength, it is going to be your drive going forward that's going to make sure that November 7th that you're going to have a whole new group of people representing you in your state government and in your national government too. And I'm hoping to have the opportunity to be your next Secretary of State so that I can protect your vote. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you today.
Shane Schoeller, everybody. That's Representative Shane Schoeller running for Secretary of State. Okay, we have a couple of unannounced speakers. And first of all, I'd like to mention Jason Smith. He's going to be here a little later, but with us today we have our veterinarian senator, Dr. Dan Brown, 16th District State Senator. Dr. Brown.